Again, we're now starting off with the book of Esther. And if you will see, the title of our series is going to be Divine Reversals. Why? Because there are so many things that are going to be unearthed, that are going to be seemingly being parang nababaliktad. It's going to be reversed just to be able to come up with the end in view of God's fulfilling His promise to God's people. So it's going to be a very beautiful series. It's going to be different. This is a book that even theologians and Bible scholars and even preachers and pastors try to shy away from. Because indeed, in spite of the fact that God is not mentioned, God is very present in every part of Esther's story. And that is what we're going to unearth in the next 9 weeks. As I've said, the title of our series is Divine Reversals, because here we will see how God divinely works to reverse certain situations in the book, in the characters' lives, to be able to reach on to the plan that God has for all of us. A commoner becoming a queen. Someone who's supposed to be exalted is killed. Someone who is supposed to be killed is exalted. There are so many things that are done in reverse or will be reversed simply because God's plan needs to be fulfilled. And God's plan will indeed be fulfilled. The book happened about 500 BC, so that's 500 years before Christ was even born. So if you remember, allow me to bring you to Solomon's time. Solomon led Israel into its glory days. Beautiful years. Peace, quiet, there was prosperity, there was wealth. Every known country would want to partner and affiliate with Israel simply because King Solomon was leading the country in such tremendous wealth and success and peace. And who wouldn't want peace, right? That's the very essence of a beautiful life when you have peace. And that was where Solomon was leading his people. And bringing us to Genesis, when God covenanted with Abraham that through him, the nations will be built, and nations, he will be the father of many nations, his children numbering more than the stars of the skies and the sand of the sea. And even that alone is already something that we should always put into remembrance. Almost 50 years, more than 50 years into the reign of King Solomon, he dies. And who takes over? His son Rehoboam. And what happens to that kingdom? The kingdom is divided into the northern and southern kingdom. So after the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, here comes the Babylonians conquering the southern kingdom. And what do you think happened? In the book of Daniel, we went through that series with Pastor Butch, was that last year or the year prior? And we know what happened. The smartest, the most beautiful, the handsomest of guys and women were all exiled to Babylon, so that there they will also be slaves to them. We know what happened to Daniel, right? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What happened there? They were exiled into a nation that was unknown to them. Pagan practices, idol worship, marrying and eating of food that they were not allowed to eat. We know what happened. They were in such a perilous, sad moment in Israel's time. But what do you think was the clamor of the people? What do you think was the question the people constantly asked? God, are you there? God, are you with us? Since the beginning of time, when man fell into sin, even before man fell into sin, this was God's intention. This was His desire. God's plan was that the people of God will be in the land of God, that was the promised land, in the presence of God. That's why the Exodus story needed to happen. They were removed from Egypt because they needed to be placed into the land of God, the land of promise. Because in the land of promise, that is where they were, that God's design there is for them to prosper and to grow and to worship God in His presence. But during the time of Esther, 500 BC, there was no nation of Israel to speak of. Somebody occupied their land. There was no people of Israel to speak of. They were all exiled or gone. Therefore, there was no presence of God to speak of. They couldn't feel God. They couldn't hear God. They didn't know if God even cared. So after the Babylonian exile, Daniel through Jeremiah prophesied that they were going to be in exile for how many years? 70. If you will remember, when Pastor Butch preached on Jeremiah 29, most of us, Jeremiah 29:13, that was our life verses. But when Pastor Butch unearthed and showed us, this was when the Israelites were exiled. And God was telling them, you plant there, you grow there, marry there, have families, grow trees, plant trees, grow trees. Lord, ang tagal nun ah. That's not even just 5 years. If you need to establish a family there, that you will need to take root. They've lived more than half of their lives in Israel, that they have gotten accustomed to the culture. They know every street, every bus that you need to take, every MRT. That's where they started to grow. And this is where the book of Esther comes in. When the Persians came in under Cyrus in 538 BC, the Israelites were allowed to go back to Israel. All the 70 years that they were in exile in Babylon, they were asking, Lord, where are you? When are you going to bring us back? When are you going to return us to our country? When can we worship you? Do you hear us? Do you hear my problems? Do you have any concern? Now, God seemingly heard them because Cyrus encouraged them, okay, masyado na kayong madami. There's now so many slaves and so many exiles. Sige, go back. Go back to your country. And he did not only allow them to go back, he also allowed them to rebuild their temple. The presence of God is there. So in Ezra, you will read about 50,000 Jews went back to Israel, not only to reside back there, but also to rebuild their temple. And this is where the story of Esther comes in. 480 BC is when Esther happens. Between Ezra chapter 6 and chapter 7 is a 58-year gap. And this time is when Esther happens. So if you're taking down notes, I've entitled today's conversation, When God Was Silent. When God seemingly was not speaking to His people. When God seemingly was absent. When people were wondering, God, do you hear? Do you care? Do you even listen to us? Are you still there around? The past pandemic has placed us in that situation. A lot of us have lost our loved ones, lost their jobs. A lot of our brethren went back to the Philippines untimely because they lost jobs here and they couldn't find any. God, can you hear? I need a job. God, can you hear me? This is the season when God was silent in the life of Esther. And if there's one truth in the whole book, not only today, but in the whole book for that matter, I want us to be able to take this home. That God is providentially present even when He is apparently absent. Even when you do not really see Him. Even if we do not see Him at work. Mga kapatid, He is providentially present. He is there. Pag akala mo wala ang Diyos, mali. As a matter of fact, nauna pa siya sa atin. He has seen everything. He has seen the end, and He wants to take us there. Our God is a covenant-keeping God. As far as He is concerned, He will fulfill His promise. It is His plan to take us there with Him. Therefore, when you feel that He is, mukhang wala si God, when He's apparently absent, bear in mind that He is providentially present. He will see us through. He will bring us to the end. Let's begin. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned in 127 provinces. So remember, King Cyrus led the Persians to victory. After King Cyrus came King Darius, and Xerxes is the son of King Darius. King Darius prepared the whole empire for his son to lead. 127 provinces. That's a lot of countries. That's about 20 countries all in all. And it said it covered from Egypt, from Ethiopia, which is here at the bottom, to India. This is more than half of the then known world. And of course, Israel was one of the countries that was conquered. The Persian Empire had 4 capital cities, but where Xerxes stayed was in Shushan, or Susa. That is where he enthroned himself. And if you will read through history, King Xerxes liked the idea of being enthroned at the highest space. He would always be at the height, at the peak. So he would choose the highest hill, the highest mountain, and put an even higher throne there so that he will be seen in all his splendor and resplendent. He wanted to shine and show forth his glory. At the end of the 3rd year of his reign, he held a banquet. It was no ordinary banquet. The who's who of society was there. Military officers, nobility, prince and princesses, duke and duchesses were there present. And the top military officers of each province was invited to join him. That was not the big news. The big news is this. How long did the party go? 180 days. Can you imagine partying for 6 months? His objective, his purpose, was to display his tremendous, magnificent, everything that is exag, marvelous, beautiful, grand. All those words, that is how rich this king was. This is how rich the empire was. In the next party, all the people, greatest to the least, so their gardeners, their slaves, their chefs, their cook, everybody, the secretaries and the leaders of his town, so that would be Susa, were the ones invited for a 7-day party. So imagine, 6 months and 7 days na silang nagpa-party. And mind you, the king did not even settle for doing it in the palace. He established and built a courtyard simply to have this party. And the author of the book, which is unknown, beautifully described how the courtyard looked like. Cotton curtains, white cotton curtains, blue hangings, purple ribbons, white linen cords. And look at the colors that were being described. Only the rich and the nobility will be able to afford such colors. That is how rich they are. That's why Persian rugs during that time, even now, are very expensive because of the pureness of the color and the variety of the colors of the weaves that they have. And the goblet was not the only one that was expensive. Royal wine was being served in them, reflecting of the king's generosity. Here was the king displaying everything that he had. And there was only one law that was passed during this time of partying. What was that? Party away, Sky's the limit. Because during this time, the king had to set the pace. If the king drank, that's the only time the guests drank. If the king stopped drinking, they would all stop drinking. If the king stood up, everybody stands up. If the king sits down, everybody sits down. They always look after what the king is doing. But this time, King Xerxes told his people, do whatever you want. Sky's the limit. You want to drink all night? Hanggang magka-handu-handusay ka dyan until you fall down there? Go! Nobody will stop you. The only thing the servers are going to do are keep on serving your cup once they are not full anymore. At the same time, in Queen Vashti's house, in Queen Vashti's corner, so that is the king's wife, he was also partying with the women. So the men are partying while the women parties away. And on the seventh day of the party, what happens? I like this description. When King Xerxes was high in spirits because of wine, what do you think happened? What do you think is happening? He is drunk. He cannot anymore think properly because he is drunk. And what did he do? He asked his eunuchs to call his wife. If Xerxes was displaying all his wealth and grandeur, I'd like to think that the crown had something very special in it. Maybe the most expensive of jewels were on his crown, that he also wanted to display that. And we all know that King Vashti was very beautiful. But during this time, the wives were kept. They were hidden. Every time they'd go out, they'd be covered. So nobody has seen Vashti except the people in the palace. So he was being coaxed into asking the wife to come and present herself. But when the eunuchs came back, maybe they were very, very scared. King, Vashti doesn't want to go out. She's not obeying you. And because of that, the king was very furious. And King Xerxes was known to be a hot-tempered and someone who would blow his lid off when he gets angry. As a matter of fact, the description seems to match him so. He was burning with anger. I can imagine how red he was. So, the most powerful king in the most powerful empire in the then known world consults with his advisors. He's supposed to be the king and knows everything, but here he is consulting his advisors and asks them, what can be done to Queen Vashti, who refuses to obey my call? Because during this time, the women did not have any vote, remember? They would always just only be subservient, not even submissive, subservient to their husbands, meaning they will just always say yes. Whatever you say, yes, 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 sir, yes, sir, I'll do it, sir, yes. That's the only thing they do. They did not have a position. They did not have a say. The women were treated as second-class citizens, that they were almost nothing. Because look what this wise advisor advises. Every husband, for refusing to come before you, he has wronged all of you, all of the husbands. Remember, these were eunuchs. So they're castrated, they cannot be husbands. So he said, and before the day is over, every wife, the wife of all these men in this court, will know what happened. They would have reported to the wives. How else would the wives know? Because there were only men there, right? So he said, at the end of this day, King, the husbands will already have reported to their wives, and their wives mag-aalsa yan. Because they will already know what Queen Vashti did to you for defying your call and your request. But look how God is going to weave into His providential graces the story of Esther so that it will come out to be the end of His plan happening. Because God is providentially present, even when He seems He is apparently absent. Even if you don't see him, you don't feel him, you don't hear him, he's there at work. He will never stop working until the time that his plan is fulfilled. So what happens? Come up with a law. Banish Vashti forever. It's not even for a short time. Said, banish her from the presence of the king. And when you banish her, you cannot even call her, you cannot see her. She is going to be placed amongst the concubines. I will explain that later. Among the concubines. And after that, when you've banished her, let's choose another queen for you. A better one, more worthy than she is. Ibig sabihin, they're going to choose another queen who is more subservient. Somebody who will just obey. Somebody who will just be a yes man to you. And of course, the very powerful man, the king agreed to it because the wise advisor told him that when you do this, every husband, everywhere, whatever their rank may be, will receive the proper respect from their wives. So the kings and nobles throughout, they all agreed. Makes sense. So let's do it. Because after this, every man will be the ruler of their home, and they should say whatever they please. That's the key. Whatever, right or wrong, whatever they please, he said, every man will be ruler of their house. So, what happens? This is what happens when your advisors are only seemingly wise. When God is out of the picture, we make decisions that are not in accordance to who He is and what His plan is for us. That's what happens. When God is not in the picture, imagine our life will be all wayward. Your decisions are wrong. The way you look at things are wrong. Every aspect of your life just doesn't turn out right when God is out of the picture. Xerxes doesn't know any better. He doesn't even know God. But we who knows God should always be in constant check on Him. We have access to the presence of God, and He is there no matter if you don't feel Him, because that is His promise. He will fulfill His promise. That's the end of chapter 1. And between chapter 1 and chapter 2, there are 2 years that happened. You know another reason why King Xerxes had that big party of 6 months? Because he was trying to win the favor of all the 127 province leaders to be able to conquer Greece. Because Greece at this time was taking on a power. You could see them that this small country had such a very good military strategy that they were getting some of the countries around them already. So Xerxes needed to come in and wage war against them to stop them. And add to that, his father was killed because of a war with the Greeks. So King Xerxes was doing that. So between chapter 1 and chapter 2, the king waged war against Greece. And when this happened, he took in about 1 to 2 million men to fight with him. And they were defeated by a small army of Greeks. And only 5,000 of them returned. He was sad. And 2 years down the road, his anger against Vashti has already calmed down. And he was looking for someone to speak with, to tell the story of what happened in Greece. Someone who's not going to judge him. Someone whom he will be able to pour his heart out. And his wife was there no longer. So instead of the king changing his mind and wanting to call back Vashti and rescind his law, they made a proposal. And what was that proposal? Let's search for the beautiful young virgins for the king. They wanted to embark on an empire-wide beauty pageant. Miss Persia Empire 478 BC. So what they did was to assign talent scouts or agents in every province. That's what the advisor said. Go and look for the 127, in the 127 provinces, look for the most beautiful, young, unmarried virgins in your town. This is something that is forcibly done. They did not have a choice. They are placed in a harem, and they say that Haggai was the one who was in charge of that harem where the new girls come in and be placed. Let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. What does it mean? Aside from checking whether that girl is beautiful enough, stately enough, this is not a Miss Universe beauty pageant that we know today. It is more like The Bachelor, rated R. Because one of the criteria of choosing the queen is his sexual compatibility with the king. And that was the measure. This is sex slavery to the max. Once they're in the harem, they will never be able to join their families. It is not a privilege. Although they will live in luxury, they will have the best food, the best clothes, the best jewelry. What use is that if you're in jail? It's pretty much like putting you in jail because there was no going out once you're recruited into the harem. There was a Jewish man named Mordecai who was the son of Jair and who is from the tribe of Benjamin. True blue. He is a Jew. This is important as we travel through the whole story because then we will understand how things were happening. And they were part of those exiled from Jerusalem, pretty much like the time of Daniel. But Mordecai was there and he was given a name, not a Hebrew name any longer, but his name was akin to the king of the Babylonians, who was Marduk. They already understood the culture. This is their home. This is their life. And this Mordecai had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was called Esther. Even Hadassah's name was already changed. Daniel retained his name, Daniel, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego embraced the name that was given to them, just as a sign that they already was enmeshed into the culture of the Persians. She was an orphan. Esther was an orphan. Therefore, Mordecai stood like his father. He took care of her. And as a result of the king's decree, Esther did not have a choice but to be part of the harem. Haggai, the chief eunuch of the harem, was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. Haggai just found favor upon her. That what did she do? She provided her a special menu. She had special food. She was provided with beauty treatments. And Esther, up until this point, kept her nationality and family background as Mordecai have advised her to. The reason, we don't know. But maybe because he knew that as Jews, they were going to be treated differently. And things may not have been as easy for Esther. But every day, Mordecai would come, sisilipin niya si Esther. How are you? Gaganunan lang siguro sila. When she sees Esther very nice and good, then he'll just go. He'll be happy with seeing that his cousin was doing very well. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of spa treatments. So they had 6 months treatment of myrrh. What is myrrh? Myrrh is a medicated thing. Every skin blemish that they have is going to be treated first. So they needed to strip their tan off. They needed to be white as snow. And every blemish on their body needed to be stripped off and removed. And after their medication, after their medicating, they are now going to have 6 months of special perfumes and ointments galore. And when it was time to go to the king's palace, she was given a choice of whatever jewelry and clothes that were there. So you're going to clothe yourself. Pili ka. The most beautiful of jewels were there, and the only thing that they have to do is choose. And that evening, she was taken to the king's private room, and the next morning, she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives live. As I told you, in the first harem, that is where all the recruits go. After their night with the king, they are transferred to the concubine's harem. Why? Because they are of no use anymore to any man. Because they are no longer a virgin. That's why being in the king's harem is not a pleasing position. It is pretty much like they are accursed. Because after that, they can no longer go with their families. They can no longer go with any man. There was no future for them but to stay inside the second harem. And there they are going to be among the concubines. And if the king enjoyed her, that's the only time that she can go see the king again and meet her. And he needed to call her by name. It was Esther's time to go. She accepted the advice of Haggai and only took what was advised of her. Maybe some of the girls would get bracelets hanggang shoulder. From the wrist to the shoulder, puro bracelet. Diba? Necklaces up until full na yung kanilang neck and up until the floor. But Haggai was just simply admired Esther because she only got the simplest, the most prudent. Thus, she was admired by everyone. Yet another favor again. So Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace at about winter time. So mga December daw siguro to. And what happened? Esther won. She became Miss Persia 478 BC. She became the queen of the empire because King Xerxes chose her and put the crown over her. Being the party man that he was, he created a great banquet for Esther. And when he created the banquet, the difference here is that the first one, he was strategizing, he was thinking, he was planning. This time around, he was happy. He was happy to introduce that I have found myself a wife. So he declared a public holiday in the provinces and gave gifts to everyone. He had to share his blessing to everybody. People would say, it's not right what Esther did and what Mordecai did. Right? They're not supposed to marry into the pagan families. They are not supposed to eat of food offered to idols. They are not supposed to lie about who they were. But yet, Esther was raised to power. God is slowly moving, weaving into their presence so that he may be able to be presented, so that his plan will come into fruition. Remember, God's people in God's land with great access to God, with great fellowship with God. At this time, the two of them are gone. Only God is present. But when God is seemingly absent, when he's apparently absent in our lives, when we do not hear him, when we do not see him, when we do not feel him, he's actually there providentially working. Look, Esther, though the times were difficult, though we know that the ways are not right, mga kapatid, God can still use you and weave into your story so that His promise and plan will be fulfilled. We can easily judge Esther and Mordecai of what they did, but at the end of the day, wherever you are, God can pretty much use you. It's not an excuse for us to sin. Remember Pastor Butch's sermon last week when he said, we are already part of the new creation. But if indeed you sin, because as Romans said, everyone has fallen short of the glory of God, nobody is sinless. But if you count yourself worthy only to be of service to God and to be used by God, at the time when you're no longer sinning, you're dead by then, and that is too late. God used people, no matter where they were. Noah was a drunk. Moses was hot-headed. Paul was a murderer. Peter was a denier. But they were still used. The one who denied him 3 times was the one who shared the gospel to the Jews. The one who was murdering left and right because of the faith that he had then was used to spread the gospel to us, to the Gentiles. When you want to be sinless before the time that you serve or recognize God, that's not going to happen. And then the virgins were assembled a second time. Esther knew there was something wrong, but she did not have any choice. As part of that society, and this is what was happening, she needed to abide. She became the wife of a king that did not know nor worshipped God. But up until this point, Esther kept secret her nationality and her birth background, because Mordecai advised her to. We will stop at this point, and I hope that you will come back next week, not anymore not knowing what's going to happen next. Read the whole story of Esther, because there you will see this beautiful truth, not only in these chapters, but it is true for the whole book of Esther, that God is providentially present even when He is apparently absent. When you tell me, wala ang Diyos, I do not see Him, I do not hear Him. When we are singing, God is watching us from a distance, God is so far away. No. This pandemic has stretched us so much. And I know a lot of us are questioning, God, where are you? Ang hirap, Lord. It's so difficult. It's so hard. Where are you? I don't hear you. I don't see you. Our journey with the Lord is not always heyday and fun, fancy. Sometimes they're quiet and empty. But when you think that God is not around, kapatid, He's there. As a matter of fact, He has already gone before you. So what do? Intently listen. When God speaks, listen and obey. How do we do that? Read your word. Come to church. Join your koinonia. Discuss the word of God there. Jeremiah's message, God's message through Jeremiah was that, I have given you the command, but you did not listen and obey. So we listen intently. While God is speaking, listen. And when He is quiet, listen all the more. And God will see you through so that will be fulfilled. So in the next 8 weeks to come, continue to join us, because there you will see how God's presence will be unfolded before us. Mga kapatid, this is the book series of Esther, Divine Reversals.